aficionado. I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce you to Mark Leiren-Young. He's a Canadian and a resident of Vancouver. And Mark is more than a playwright, though. His first Jewish play was called Shylock, very successful, which has been seen in Canada and in the US. He's an award-winning journalist, a film and radio producer with a keen interest in environmental issues, I would say especially whales and orcas. He's done a documentary on a 100-year-old whale called Moby Doll. And he's done a lot more. He's also a comedy writer, a nonfiction author. Mark, I really enjoyed reading this play, and I can't wait to see the Jewish Repertory production on video. I love the dialogue, the story, the characters, and please tell us more about yourself.
Thank you so much for doing this. I should just let you know where I am and why I've got this virtual background. I actually live in Victoria on Vancouver Island, so close. But if you live in Buffalo, Vancouver Island, kind of close. And my background is pretty eclectic. When people ask me what I do, I basically just say I write, and then I figure out what they read, and I just answer whatever. I'll often just say I'm a journalist because that's easier than saying I write plays, I write movies, I write TV, I write cartoons. But I just tell stories. I find stories that obsess me and I kind of stick with them. And that's what I've done all my life. And yeah, when you were talking about Shylock, which was my play that I wrote, wow. It feels weird to say 30 years ago now.
About the Shakespeare character.
Yeah, about Shakespeare's infamous Jew. I wrote that play about a Jewish actor who was taking heat from the Jewish community for playing Shylock in Merchant of Venice. And since that debuted in '91, it's been seen all throughout Canada, the US, at Shakespeare festivals, and in various places in Europe. It just finished a 3-year run in Prague, where it was translated into Czech.
How interesting.
One of the more amazing theater experiences of my life was watching it. And because the actor was so good, it's a one-person show, I was laughing at the jokes because I understood the rhythms. And of course, they're lines from Shakespeare. So Shakespeare sounds like Shakespeare in Czech. And every once in a while I'd laugh because I'd see that he was landing a joke. So the audience was like, "You speak very good Czech." I'm like, "I speak no Czech at all." Yeah, so Shylock's been done everywhere. And Bar Mitzvah Boy just kind of happened a few years ago, and it's started to show up in theaters throughout Canada and the US, which is very exciting. And it was just published by Playwright's Canada Press. Let's see.
Now we can
the virtual
see it.
background. Yes, if I hold it.
So tell us a little more. Bar Mitzvah Boy is going to be appearing at the JRT on video from November 5th to the end of November. Can you tell us a little more about it?
Yeah, Bar Mitzvah Boy is about a guy in his 60s or better who decides he needs a bar mitzvah and he needs it now. And he connects with a rabbi who is dealing with some of her own issues and also doesn't want to deal with this fairly demanding lawyer who wants all of her time and attention. So it's the story of really the growing friendship and relationship between the rabbi and her very interesting student, and their struggles with faith and religion and what it means to be Jewish in this day and age.
Well, I really thought just the characters, the two characters, you break the mold in the play with the characters, the 65-plus-year-old bar mitzvah boy and the young female rabbi named Michael.
Yes.
Now, you and I know that Michael means beloved of God, right? But that's why did you name your female rabbi character Michael?
Oh, wow. Names are really tough. Names are always an obsession for me when I'm writing fiction. And because I wanted to set up the expectation that our bar mitzvah boy wanted a very traditional bar mitzvah. He's waited a while to have this bar mitzvah, and he wanted to have the bar mitzvah by the books. And so I was looking for, once I knew that my rabbi was female, I thought I want to go one more level and at least have that moment of surprise when he realizes the rabbi's female. Uh, so I wanted a name that was at the very least ambiguous. And then I started looking up meanings, and I just loved the meaning of Michael. Really appealed to me. So,
Right. My
Michael as a
husband's name is
female
Michael,
name is, and
beloved
it's
of God.
funny. Michael as a female name is fairly rare, except the female lead in the new Star Trek series is also named Michael. And I'm going, no fair. It was a much rarer name before Star Trek Discovery came out. And people go, yeah, I've heard of female Michaels. I saw Star Trek Discovery. I'm like,
Well, we do have Michal in Hebrew, and
yes,
that's a
absolutely.
common female name. So,
But I remember I looked at a whole bunch of names. I always do. I my one of my favorite writing guides when I'm doing fiction is I have a baby book by my side, and you look up meanings of names.
oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's
Well, you also had some interesting names for an occasional congregant, say Susie Friedman Wong. We don't have Chinese Jews in Buffalo. Talk about this interesting. I mean, clearly that
that
wasn't
was a Vancouver
accidental.
thing. That was really more of a that's West Coast. That's Vancouver, Victoria. Uh, it's funny the names of some of the other characters. That's just where I say it's dangerous to be in a writer's phone book. So
Oh, sure.
I one of the characters is named after, because of this what this play is. I snuck in the names of my bar mitzvah teacher from when I was a kid, my
Oh, funny.
rabbi from when I was a kid is in here. Uh, One of my best friends who actually was my consultant on this on a lot of one of my best friends was rabbi's wife, and she for like one of my best friends growing up, married a rabbi, very orthodox. She's made aliyah, and I reached out to her and I said, look, I need to talk to you about, I've written this play, I want to make sure I've got the right Torah portion. And so she and I went back and forth on email about choosing the Torah portion that our bar mitzvah boy was going to study.
Okay,
And,
before you go anymore,
yeah,
well, you can finish, but I want you to talk about that amazing Torah portion.
okay. And we also went back and forth. I said, I need to know, I want to make sure I've got all the prayers correctly. And I want to mention something else because this is an interesting thing, because you're in Buffalo, you're different. You were joking about my accent the other day. Well, when we were doing the premiere of this play, the actor playing Michael, the actor playing the rabbi, wasn't Jewish, and so she needed to learn Hebrew. And what we discovered was, because there isn't a ton of Hebrew in the play, but there is some, and she needed to she needed to learn Hebrew and do the correct accent. So what happened was we brought in a we called him, our director was Jewish, but our director's from England. So his Hebrew sounded completely wrong. Then our bar mitzvah boy was originally from Chicago. So his accent sounded completely wrong. She was supposed to be a West Coast rabbi for this, and sounded completely wrong to a Vancouver ear because his Hebrew was Chicago. So we brought in a Jewish consultant uh, to help with the Hebrew. He was from Toronto. His Hebrew sounded, I'm sure, like yours does. So she said, "Oh, Mark, do yours." Well, what I discovered is that my Hebrew sounds like I'm from Odessa because I've got my grandfather's accent. So I've got my Zeta Ben's
How
Hebrew. So my Hebrew was useless.
interesting.
And we finally had to try. So my friend Sandy is sitting there in Israel. So there's a reason there's a character named Sandy. This is thank you to my friend Sandy. She's
Oh,
in Israel reciting all of the prayers. So that because she's the only one who had an accent that sounded right. And when the play opened in Vancouver, some of the audience members, including my cousin who was just getting his bar mitzvah, said, well, I knew that one of the actors wasn't Jewish. And we're like, oh, that's really interesting. He said, yeah, the bar mitzvah boy tried really hard, but you just knew from his Hebrew that he wasn't Jewish because he had this. He sounded like he was from Chicago. His Hebrew sounded totally wrong to my cousin's ear, and so we'd have Jews show up at the play who were convinced that Gina, who was Italian, was Jewish because her Hebrew sounded like Vancouver Hebrew.
Oh, funny. That's
And
so
then our bar
funny.
mitzvah boy, no, he was learning Hebrew because his Hebrew was Chicago Hebrew.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well, I don't know if Buffalo and Toronto Hebrew are
pretty
the
similar.
same, but a lot of us spent summers in Toronto, have family in Toronto, go back and forth to Toronto.
When I lived in
And
Toronto, I actually came to Buffalo once to watch the Sabres play the Canucks. So
speaking of the Sabres, there's a sports reference early on in the play. And you obviously, having been here, know that Buffalo's a big sports town.
oh yeah,
Are other cities with sports teams where the play has been produced or being produced, bringing their own team flavors? Like
they're
we're
supposed to.
doing it in Buffalo, and so it'll either be the Bills or the Sabres.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I come from, I do, my background is a lot of topical work. I used to do a lot of topical comedy. I do a lot of journalism. So when I put a reference in a play that's local, I always put a note,
Sure.
use the local team, right? So yeah, when I was writing it, it was the Canucks. I can't remember who they used when it was done in Chester, Massachusetts. Did it? I can't. They used a local team.
The
I'm trying to remember.
Bruins or the Boston the Patriots, the
Yeah,
hated
I
Patriots.
just know they didn't use the Bruins because as a hockey guy, I would have remembered that.
Oh, okay, so
Well,
maybe the
as a hockey
Patriots.
guy who watched the Bruins beat my Canucks in Game Seven, I
Okay,
would have remembered
well,
that.
we want the Bills to continue to beat the Patriots.
Yeah,
Um,
we
but
do.
okay, so going back to, we were talking about the Torah portion. Mark, you picked the most amazing Torah portion, the Akedah, where Abraham takes his son Isaac, and we aren't sure exactly whether he's a little boy or a grown man, up to Mount Moriah and is about to kill him, we believe.
Yeah.
And that's the Torah portion you chose. Why did you choose? I mean, what's the meaning of that?
Oh well, I mean, I went back and forth with Sandy, and this is one of the other things we had to do was once we chose the Torah portion, we had to schedule. We had to make sure the holidays fit, the timing fit.
Oh, sure.
So I basically, so Sandy had a lot of say. And when you look at how this play evolved, I was going, okay, so what would this week be? What would this Torah portion be? And um, it ties into so many of the themes of the play without trying to give things away around sacrifice. But really, the play is a struggle with faith. And
Yeah.
after watching responses to Shylock for 30 years, I kind of put in every kind of argument that I'd had or seen about faith somehow ended up in this play somehow. We were talking about. I should probably talk about the priest, right? Well,
It's,
we had one of when I did Shylock in Vancouver when Shylock premiered in Vancouver, the Anglican Church of Canada was going through a fight over same-sex blessing, and several churches in Canada had actually split up
what
over
year
the.
was that?
Oh, this was '90s, early '90s,
Ooh,
and several churches in Canada had split, with conservative congregants of those churches splitting when same-sex blessing was allowed. So the dean of the basically the head Anglican in the Lower Mainland, who was one of the most liberal bishops in the world, decided to commission me to write a play about same-sex blessing in the Anglican Church. And I'm going, I don't know if I want to do this. And I said, seriously, you're getting a straight Jewish guy to write this play about same-sex blessing in the Anglican Church. You really sure I'm your guy? I went, yeah, you wrote Shylock. You're my guy. And I said, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to research it. And I did this as a piece of verbatim theater where I interviewed various people. And one of the people that who I interviewed for this play was the dean of Christ Church Cathedral in Vancouver. And we started talking about faith and the Bible. And at one point he says, yeah, you know, that's all metaphorical, right? And my jaw dropped because honestly, I thought, like, I actually said to him, I said, isn't your job to believe all this stuff? No, my job is like, and we had this really
To
hilarious
believe the
conversation.
Bible stories. To
Yeah, I
believe the
thought
Bible
that if you
stories.
were a priest, or for that matter, a rabbi, that part of the gig was that you took the Bible literally. Like, that was just always my assumption growing up, was that if you were the head of a community of faith, that nothing was metaphor, that it was all that you believed this stuff literally. So to hear this priest going, no, it's all metaphor, Mark. That it's the importance of the story, it's the importance of the meeting. And I decided I would give Joey, my bar mitzvah boy, pretty much the same reactions I had. So there's this whole conversation about faith in this play that is fundamentally the conversation that I had with the dean of Christ Church Cathedral. It
Wow,
was pretty hilarious.
that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So, but Mark, you've got really good banter going between Joey, the bar mitzvah boy, and the rabbi. You've got Star Trek jokes. You've got kashrut jokes and lots of Jewish jokes. But I've read this play a couple times, and even though it's a Jewish play, it's very universal story. You know, have you have different kinds of audiences other than Jews? How have they reacted to this?
The response has been amazing. It's interesting. The very first theater that this premiered at in Vancouver, they talk about being a faith-based theater. I can, you know, as a Jew, I look at them as a Christian theater. They're in the same building as a church. They primarily do. They don't. Their plays are all on religious themes. They're not high. We want you to, you know, they're not capital. You know, they're not capital R religious or anything. But they're all on religious themes. And I was theater critic in Vancouver and fell madly in love with their work. It was just so high quality. And I reached out to the artistic director. I said, I'm working on this play. Would you take a look at it? And I said, have you ever done Jewish stuff? I went, yeah. Every once in a while we come across something and we go, this is us. And they do it. And so this theater, Pacific Theater in Vancouver, did the world premiere. And Pacific is also located about 3 walking distance from the synagogue where I was bar mitzvahed. So that also made it a lot of fun.
Mm.
So it's walking distance from the 2 original synagogues in Vancouver.
So speaking of your synagogue, your original synagogue where you were bar mitzvahed, why'd you write a story about bar mitzvah? How did your bar mitzvah experience many years ago contribute to this? How did it, or did it?
Well, it's funny. It wasn't my bar mitzvah experience that inspired this. This is, you know, writers often sit on ideas forever. I don't know if I've ever sat on an idea for quite this long. When I was a teenager, one of my closest friends, his name is Steve Kaplan, which is about as Jewish a name as you can get. We were talking, I think he's a couple years older than me. I think he was about 18, 19. And we were talking one day and he said, you know, I don't really feel Jewish. I said, seriously? Your name's Steve Kaplan. You basically live at the Jewish Community Center. He did stuff there all the time. Anyway, yeah, but I never had a bar mitzvah. I never had a real bar mitzvah. Mm. And I thought, the idea that somebody wouldn't feel Jewish because they didn't have a bar mitzvah just stuck with me. Like, it just always sort of sat, like, so from the time I was a teenager, I thought, I've got to write something about somebody who doesn't feel Jewish because they haven't had a bar mitzvah. And it sort of sunk in. And over the years, I kind of pictured, weirdly, I thought it would be much more fun if this was an older guy who hadn't had their bar mitzvah. And I remember probably 10, 15 years ago now, I was talking to my theater agent and he said, do you have any other plays that you're working on? I said, I've got this idea I've never been able to shake. I said, I've always wanted to write a 2-hander like Educating Rita, or I mean, I can name a dozen.
A 2-hander. Explain
two-person play. Okay. I've always thought they're really elegant. I've seen so many that I've loved over the years, and I've always wanted to write one. And I said, I feel like I've got this great idea. It's for a bar mitzvah boy and a rabbi, and he's reluctant to have his bar mitzvah, but he really wants it, and there's stuff at the heart of this. I think it'd be a really strong comedy. And my Michael Petrowski, who was my theater agent, went, "What if the rabbi was a woman?" And it was one of, like, if you remember the old V8 commercials, it was this perfect V8 moment where it's just like, of course, that makes this so much stronger. And I started noodling on it. I wrote bits and pieces, and this is, like I said, 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago now, and still didn't see it. I saw where the comedy was, but I didn't know what it was about. And then one day I was out for dinner with my niece, and my niece turned to me and said, "Uncle Mark, do you believe in God?" And I thought, the answer to this question could change my relationship with my brother for life. What is the correct answer that as an uncle I am allowed to give to this question right now? And before I could respond, she said, "Cause I know God is," and she used words I probably shouldn't say on YouTube. And then she said, because she had a friend who was dying, who was her age. And
yeah.
I thought, wow, that's a question of faith. And I started thinking about that, and suddenly went, okay, I want to add another level to the conversation between my rabbi and my bar mitzvah boy.
Well, and I'm not giving anything away. I actually talked to Jordana, and we said, "Can we say this?" So there's a child with cancer that's in the play.
So
that's a theme. And
that's a theme.
And that's how you enable your characters to talk about God. Is there a God? And that's how do you explain tragedies? And
but that was the missing link to me. The moment I saw that, I that's.
But you say something really interesting. You talk about the idea of God talking to us versus us talking to God. The burning bush, is that God talking to us, or are we just, and that was fascinating.
Thank you. It was so much fun to play with. Again, I've had all these amazing conversations about faith over the years, both through doing this play for the Anglican Church, from doing Shylock, just from living. And I tried to weave as much of that as possible into this play. I decided I would just throw all these questions to Joey. I thought I'll give all these different questions. And the other thing that happened where I go back to this play, there's a very straight ahead comedic version of this play, which was where it was going before the conversation with my niece. And then the play just kind of came alive and happened. But part of what happened as well was I hung out with her rabbi, who was a female rabbi in Vancouver. And I just started asking the rabbi questions. So that rabbi wasn't exactly the inspiration for Michael. There were a lot of inspirations. There's a little bit of her in there. There's a little bit of Rabbi Solomon, my rabbi growing up. There's a little bit of Rabbi Harry, my rabbi in Victoria. Like, there are bits and pieces of all sorts of people I've met over the years. But to actually be talking, to be consulting with a rabbi on this as I was writing it was a huge help.
Whether God talks to us or we just talk to God was fascinating to think about. And in the context of the play, it was just really, really wonderful. There's some beautiful dialogue about tikkun olam, also repairing the world, and what it means and why it matters. Why did you include tikkun olam?
I became sort of obsessed with that concept when I was working on Shylock a jillion years ago, and I love the idea of tikkun olam. I love the idea of that what we're doing matters. The whole concept of repairing the world is beautiful to me, and it's something I mention a lot when I'm doing my environmental writing. Is that something I come back to as sort of an article of faith? Is what can we do to repair the world? So.
And you talk about the role of being part of a community, and also a Jewish community in this case, or separating oneself from the community. Is Joey part of the community because he has a bar mitzvah, or was he separated because he didn't have a bar mitzvah, and why that matters. Why does he even bother he's a successful divorce lawyer. What does he need to go get bar mitzvahed? I got bar mitzvahed at 44, but I wasn't a divorce lawyer. But and girls, when I was growing up, girls weren't bat mitzvahed, and now they are. And so many of us did this late. But this was really, really interesting, separating or becoming part of. You want to just talk about that for a minute?
Well, it's interesting because when I moved to Victoria a few years ago, I've lived here off and on over the years, and it's a much smaller community. The synagogue here is the oldest in Western Canada. I think it's the second oldest, or it's either the oldest or second oldest synagogue operating in Canada. But it's a very small community. It's astonishing that this shul has survived as it has in a community that's never been more than really. There never more than a few thousand Jews, and it started when there were a few hundred, and it's always held together. And it's right in downtown Victoria, the shul here, and probably because it's a smaller community, I've become, I'm more aware of the Jewish community here than I have been in other places I've lived. Because if you go to shul, you're going to see those people at the store or whatever,
You make a difference when you're there. By being there.
Yeah. Well, hey, we've just been doing Zoom services, which has been quite the experience. And doing high holidays on Zoom was an interesting ride.
Yes,
doing
it
Seder's
was
on Zoom, but being here has made me think more about community. And my wife's in the process of converting, which has made me more aware of the Jewish community here and the importance of community as a whole. So that became a theme in the play.
Several songs and prayers have a role in this production. Two of them are Adon Olam, which are in I'm guessing, all different tunes, and the Kaddish. And how have audiences reacted to both? Do they sing along with Adon Olam with Joey and Michael, or do they rise and say Kaddish? I mean, that's what I was imagining.
It has been a completely. It depends. The play's been done, like I said, the play's been done at Jewish theaters. The play's been done at definitely not a Jewish theater. The play's been done at theaters with no religious, affiliations at all, just regular secular theaters, and the response differs from venue to venue. When I wrote it, I never imagined the audience was going to want to sing Adon Olam, and then the world premiere, I guess, like the first time it was ever read, this won the Jewish Playwriting Prize. And so there was a reading at a large public reading at the Y in New York, and the audience wanted to sing Adon Olam at the end. And the director and I looked at each other and went, we just didn't see that coming, right? It didn't even occur to us. And at Pacific Theater, the Jews in the audience started to sing along at the end when there was Adon Olam. So we actually had non-Jewish audience members go, why don't you have the words in so we can sing along if we want to? The non-Jewish audience members were going, no, we would have sung along. I'm like, what? It just wouldn't have occurred to me. And at Jewish theaters, sometimes they've sung along, sometimes they haven't. It's been a completely, we don't try for that. But I know that in the Los Angeles production, I think I gather singing the Adon Olam with everybody became how the play ended every night. It became this really communal experience. There've been, I think, 7 productions so far, and they've all been completely unique in terms of where the audience is.
And what about the Kaddish?
The Kaddish, remember, I've mostly only seen opening nights for the shows, except in Vancouver where I went to a lot. I never saw anybody else stand for the Kaddish, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Because my frame of reference is, I saw the show twice in Massachusetts. I saw the show 7 times in Vancouver. it was done 30 times in each of these cities. So I don't know from night to night how things shifted.
Yeah. Oh. You also talk about the Ner Tamid, the eternal light. It has a shining role in this story. I love that. Why did you include that?
Well, it's funny. Uh, and again, Ner Tamid, I've always just referred to it as the eternal light. That's what it was called. You know, when I was growing up, I don't remember ever hearing the term Ner Tamid when I was at Talmud Torah. And when I wrote the play, I thought, what would a rabbi call it? I thought, I'll bet you there's a better name than Eternal Light.
Mm-hmm.
And but whenever I've gone to a synagogue, I've found weird, like that's the first thing I look for. It's for whatever reason that's always appealed to me. And when I've been in a synagogue and zoning out, and for whatever reason, and I feel like praying, but I don't, something's not connecting. I just stare at the light, and to me, the light has always been where I've focused
Mm,
when I'm trying to
that's
make my connection with God or spirituality.
sure.
I've I've looked to the light, and when I've gone and visited synagogues around the world, it's like I always look at the light. So I decided I would put in a character who always looks at the light. So
Wow.
that was me. That's
And
you
that
know
light, in a way, is a character too. In your
yeah. Well,
Tamid, you've
oh,
got that
and
as a character in a way. Well, I don't know if we haven't seen any questions, and it is there anything else you would like to talk about the play, about being Jewish on Victoria Island, about what are Jews in Buffalo? Any kind of other question?
wow. I'm not sure what would be fun to talk about. Uh, I'm game to sort of go anywhere with this, but yeah, it's really exciting seeing this play happen in Buffalo, especially during these times because it's a play about faith and it's a place about community. I think there's a real power in sharing this particular story during the pandemic
Oh,
when it
absolutely.
and I've found in some ways I look at the community here and it's been amazing getting calls from the shul going, are you okay? Our shul's been doing that,
Right,
checking in with everybody because
right.
you know and everybody's stressed out in the pandemic. And there was this beautiful call that went out from my shul going, are you okay? Where they sent out an email going, if anybody needs counseling or to talk to the rabbi or anything like that. I thought, what a lovely thing to do, and what a lovely real moment of community in these challenging times. So
Our synagogues and federation and agencies, and we have
yeah,
been doing that as well. And it matters. People appreciate being uh, appreciate being cared about, appreciate mattering to somebody else, and especially now when it's hard to, you don't know what matters.
oh,
Um,
absolutely. And you know, uh, it's I read this story, I think it was in the Atlantic, that was talking about how right now, just by the nature of COVID and the nature of isolation, and that we can't really go out and see each other, talk to each other, hug each other, uh, that almost everyone in the world is technically suffering from clinical depression. And
yeah,
if you break down what clinical depression is, we're all living it to you know because of COVID. We're all living it because of this
right.
pandemic. So outreach from community is just so vital right
Well,
now.
in
And
this way with
theater like this
Zoom, it,
is so
it
exciting right now.
it's so to be able to, the JCC in Buffalo had the film festival. We
Yep.
used to go to the theater and we got to sit and watch in our living room. And this is the first year I was able to see all the films
Yeah.
because it wasn't during and the same with this. They're offering, of the 5 plays in the series, we'll be able to watch for about a month each time. And
That's very exciting.
it really is, because it can reach everybody whenever they feel like seeing it. And that's so terrific. But this is such a touching play. It's so meaningful. And I thought it was just fabulous. I'm really looking forward to to being able to see it, on the screen. I mean, I've read it. Now we have an occasional. Okay, here's the question: what are the differences in how you approach your writing when you're writing fiction or nonfiction?
Oh wow. Let's see. Fewer than you'd think because I take my fiction very seriously. Like I do, I am a research nerd. So even when I'm writing science fiction or fantasy, I've written a whole bunch of supernatural TV for some reason. So I've written like supernatural thrillers and stuff like that.
Only
Wrote,
Canadian TV? Could we see it
uh,
in the US?
yeah, stuff, Sci Factor, Collector, all stuff that's been shown in the States. A series called Blood Ties that was on Lifetime in the States, which was a vampire show.
Ooh,
And I'm the guy who goes out and researches all the lore. So I don't just, I'm always fascinated by mythology and where stories come from. So even when I'm working from fiction, I try and make sure I've got my facts
sure.
straight. I try and make sure, even if those facts are lore. So it's uh, that's my approach, and same way I approached Bar Mitzvah Boy, where it's like I wrote the play, and there was a draft of the play, and then I sat down with Sandy and went, okay, does this work? You know, and I sat down with Sandy, sat down with the rabbi. So there's a draft of the play where everything is sort of off, you know, where the story's there, but then I went in and fixed the facts. There's a movie that I just wrote. I wrote a thriller. Uh, I'm not sure where it's showing in the States yet, but it was like a made-for-TV movie thriller, and
What's it
it's
called?
called The Perfect Match, and it's just straight up, you know, like I said, thriller. There's one of the plot points is that character needs a kidney transplant desperately. This is sort of the driving engine of this thriller. Well, I had to write this very quickly, and I did an entire draft. This was on a deadline for a producer. I did an entire draft. If any of you know Alfred Hitchcock's phrase for the item that everybody's searching for that doesn't really matter, called the MacGuffin. So the Maltese
Yes,
Falcon
yes,
is
yes.
the MacGuffin, right? The briefcase in Pulp Fiction is the MacGuffin. So I wrote an entire draft of this thriller where I thought I'll research it later. Doctor, he needs a MacGuffin transplant immediately, or his MacGuffin will. And I wrote the entire thing, and I just every time I hit a fact, I just went. And the director just laughed. And he said, "I wish we could stage the MacGuffin draft. It's hilarious." But then I went back and I basically talked to a bunch of doctors, and he went, "No, you chose an organ. Like originally, I can't remember what I chose, but I chose an organ that couldn't be transplanted." Uh,
Oh,
so, like, he's like, "No, your character will be dead in like 4 minutes." So I'm okay. So let's switch that out while we proper. And but I wrote the whole thing and just played, and then I went back and went, okay, what makes this work? And I did the same thing with Bar Mitzvah Boy. There's a draft where I just went, I can't remember what the Torah portion I went with was or anything like that. And then I went back and it was like this Torah portion, these the holidays that we'd be having in the shul before the Bar Mitzvah. This is how a rabbi would really respond to this. And one of the funniest things, when this was in the Jewish playwriting competition, I gather, I think it was Philadelphia, where there were a couple of rabbis on the jury. And the theater people on the jury, every once in a while, would go, well, a rabbi would never do that, would they? And the rabbis would go, yeah. A rabbi would never say that, because they were very nervous about whether the play had offended the rabbis. And what was hilarious was finally they went, there's nothing in here that a rabbi would say or do. So stop worrying about offending us. And
sure.
the scariest production, and I'm so happy I didn't know about this. There was a production, one of the nights at Pacific Theater, I gather like 3 different rabbis were invited to do a talk back.
Oh
So the
no.
rabbis from the Beth Israel and the Sheret Tzedek, which is what the 2 synagogues near the theater, were both there. And they were doing a talk back. And I thought, oh, they're going to rip it apart. And they said, no, they had no. The audience kept going, well, what about this? And I was like, there's nothing. No, there's. So the number of rabbis who've seen the play has, and every time there's a rabbi in the audience, like, there's going to be something. There's going to be something.
No, that's cool.
So
Well, Mark, how has COVID since we're sort of talking about it, and that's why we're talking to each other, affected you and your work?
Uh, it's, I mean, as a writer, I'm used to working at home, right? So as a writer, uh, I'm used to, like, lockdown is basically my Tuesday. I'm used to working at home. I'm used to writing all night, but I write a lot of theater, and I watched all of my shows get canceled. I was supposed to be, I perform once in a while. When Victoria was shut down, I was 3 days away from opening a show. I
Mm.
was going to be jumping on stage in a comedy show. And I think we shut down on the Thursday, and the show was set for Monday. And I'm sitting there going, we couldn't have shut down the world on Tuesday. Uh, so I watched a whole bunch of different things I do vanish. I theater jobs that I was working on, different jobs I was working on, sort of vanished overnight as things shut down.
Yeah.
But I've it's been interesting because some of the things that we've been doing on Zoom have been really cool, right? I just launched a new book about whales for kids called Orcas Everywhere, and I got to launch that nationally. So instead of the National Theatre of the National Arts Centre of Canada did this program called Canada Performs, where they paid artists across the country $1,000 to do Zoom readings, Zoom events from their
Wow.
homes
How
to
great.
share their work. So I got $1,000 to do a Facebook Live event to launch my book nationally. This book wasn't going to get a national tour. I was set to launch in a whole bunch of places. The biggest thing for me, uh, as we've mentioned, I've done a lot of writing about orcas. The Royal BC
Orcas,
Museum,
whales.
whales, orca, killer whales.
Yes.
So the Royal BC Museum, which is one of the best museums in North America, I've been working with them for several years on an exhibit, a $1 million exhibit about orcas. It was set to open in May. My three kids' books were tied to that exhibit. My entire year was built around public events for that exhibit. And of course, that exhibit has now been delayed at least a year because you can't open $1 million exhibit when nobody's allowed in the building. That sort of defeats the
Right.
purpose.
Right.
So, if we're all traveling next year, I hope you'll all come to Victoria and see the exhibit Orcas Our Shared Future. But that was a huge change, was watching events like that just go on hold until they.
Well, Mark, a lot of your work is about environmentalism. You're a lifelong environmentalist, and you write about orcas and forestry and all sorts of things. When did you first become passionate about environmentalism, and how has it affected your art?
Well, it's funny. We're going to go back to Tikkun Olam for that, because I feel like that's, without realizing it, I feel like that's been my environmental philosophy for most of my life,
Ah, that's
is repairing the
great.
world. I My environmental streak goes back to when I was a kid, and it was an accident. And this is where the fact that I write comedy, nonfiction, fiction, all sort of blurs into one. I got interested in the environment entirely because part of it is I'm in British Columbia. There are mountains, trees, oceans. This is the birthplace of Greenpeace. This is the birthplace of so many. Save the Whales started here. You know, this is this is sort of the world capital of tree hugging and all that. So, and this is, you know, the trees in the background. That's the University of Victoria. That's a few miles from me. So trees in the background are part of our life. I went out for a walk last night. There are deer on the streets of Victoria. So, I live about a mile from downtown Victoria. I went out and saw deer last night. So there is a bit of wilderness here. But for me, what's really funny, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, as Sasquatch is called in the States. And there was a lake monster in Okanagan Lake called the Ogopogo. So I remember I was in grade 9 and in high school, and there was a story about people about dumping this toxic chemical to kill weeds into Okanagan Lake. And in grade 9, all I could think of was, if they're pouring a toxic chemical into the lake, they could kill the Ogopogo. So my mom said, you should phone. I was doing a science project, and my mom said, why don't you just phone somebody from the organization protesting the the toxic chemical 240? And so I phoned the original environmental group in British Columbia, a group called SPEC, a Society for Protection of Environmental, can't remember what the C stands for. And somebody from SPEC talked to me, even though I was in grade 9. And this was like my first journalistic project, probably, was interviewing this person from SPEC. And it went very well because nobody phones experts in grade 9. So I received an off the charts A plus for this assignment. So my first environmental assignment was about saving the Ogopogo, but it also sort of turned me into a journalist because I went, so real people will answer my questions, even though I'm only in high school. This is cool. And if I ask questions, I get A plus grades, even though I don't understand science. This is cool too.
That's great.
So that was the big transformative moment. But really, growing up in BC, it's hard not to be an environmentalist growing up in
Sure,
wilderness,
sure.
around beautiful wilderness.
Well, thank you, Mark Leiren-Young, for this delightful talk back about your wonderful play, Bar Mitzvah Boy, which will start playing at the JRT soon. And thank you for Zoomers for watching us tonight, the first in the series of Playwright Conversations during Jewish Repertory Theater's 18th season. What we are doing now, there's a recording of this, and so Mark, you and I will be able to watch it. It'll be available on the JCC YouTube channel. Fantastic. I believe the same link that you used to get on here. And if you have a question, you can call the JRT office at the JCC. Bar Mitzvah Boy opens Thursday, November 5th, 6 p.m. And you can see this wonderful play, which is being videotaped in the JRT's Maxine and Robert Seller Theater any time of the day or night through November 25th. Tickets and subscriptions are at www.jewishrepertorytheater.com. Thank you. This was delightful. It was so much fun to get to talk to you. And I hope that you stay well and we see you sometime in Buffalo.
Thank you too. I'm so excited this is happening. And after you've watched this, after you've watched the play, if you have any questions for me, I'm reachable. I'm easy to find online. I'm Leiren-Young.com and I'm all over Twitter and social media. So if you watch the play and then you want to ask me something, I'm here. I'm really excited this play's happening in Buffalo, and I'm looking forward to being able to see this show thanks to the magic of Zoom.
Great, great, great. Bye, Mark.
Take care. Have a great night.